You know, my dear, no mother should ever have to see what I saw that day. No mother's heart is strong enough for that kind of pain. When you bring a child into this world, you promise to protect him. But sometimes, life places you in moments where you can do nothing but watch, pray, and hold on to whatever breath of hope you can find. It was a quiet evening. One of those nights when the wind carries a strange stillness. I was sitting by the window, knitting as I always do, when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was trembling. A stranger, saying they'd found my son's ID by the roadside. My heart dropped. You know that feeling, when the world suddenly stops spinning? That's what it felt like. I grabbed my shawl and ran out, not even remembering to lock the door. When I reached the place, the flashing lights nearly blinded me. There were people gathered around, whispering. My heart knew before my eyes could confirm it. There he was, my boy, lying in a ditch, covered in dirt and blood. His face was pale, his body still. I screamed his name, fell to my knees beside him, and held his hand. "Baby, can you hear me?" I whispered. His eyes fluttered open, weak and glassy, but he saw me. He tried to speak, his lips trembling. I leaned close, desperate for his words. And then he said it. It was my wife. Those 4 words cut deeper than any wound could. His wife? The woman he had chosen, the one I had opened my heart to, the one I had prayed would love him as I did. I froze. He coughed, his hand tightening around mine, and tears filled his eyes. But before he could say more, the medics pulled me back. The next few hours were a blur. The hospital lights, the sirens, the doctors shouting orders. I couldn't understand. I sat in that waiting room, my hands shaking, my mind racing through every memory, every warning I had ignored. You see, I had always felt something off about that girl. She was beautiful, yes, graceful, charming even, but her eyes were cold. The kind of cold that smiles can't hide. When my son had brought her home for the first time, she barely looked me in the eye. She was polite, but her warmth never reached her tone. I remember telling him quietly, "Son, love should bring peace, not tension." He had laughed and said, "Mama, you just need time to know her." I smiled then, because that's what mothers do. We hide our worries behind love. But that night, as I sat alone in that hospital corridor, I couldn't ignore it anymore. His words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. It was my wife. When the doctors finally let me see him, he was barely conscious. His body was broken, but his spirit was fighting. He took my hand again, and this time he whispered everything. She had been seeing someone else. When he found out, he didn't yell, didn't hit, he just walked away, but she followed him. Angry, reckless. There was an argument near the roadside, and in her rage, she pushed him. He fell, and hit his head. She ran, leaving him there, alone, bleeding in the dirt. My dear, there are moments in life when pain doesn't feel real. It just burns quietly inside you, like a slow fire that never dies out. Hearing that broke me, not just because of what she did, but because of what it did to him, how love, something meant to heal, had instead destroyed. He survived, thank God. The doctors said it was a miracle, but he was never the same after that. There was a quietness in him, a softness that came with scars too deep for anyone to see. I remember sitting with him weeks later, holding his hand and saying, "Son, don't let this turn your heart cold." He smiled faintly and said, "Mama, I learned something. Not everyone who says they love you knows what love really means." And that, my dear, is the truth of it. Sometimes the people we give our hearts to aren't capable of holding them. Sometimes love isn't gentle, it's a storm that teaches you who you are once it's past. So, if you ever find yourself loving someone who hurts you more than they heal you, remember my son's story. Love isn't meant to leave you bleeding by the roadside. Love should hold you, not harm you. And never forget, true love doesn't whisper promises, it proves them, day after day in the quietest of ways. You know, my dear, no mother ever imagines her hands trembling over her child's body, wondering if the next breath will be his last. It doesn't matter how old they get or how far they go, when you carry someone inside you once, a part of your heart lives in them forever. That bond never breaks, not with time, not with distance, not even with pain. And when that bond is threatened, when something happens to your child, it feels as though the world itself has turned against you. That day when I got the call about my boy, I didn't even think. I didn't care about my shoes, about the cold air biting at my face. All I knew was that my baby needed me. You see, mothers don't wait for details. We just move. It's instinct. The kind of instinct that doesn't ask for logic or reason. It's born of love, pure and unfiltered. When I reached that ditch and saw my son lying there, blood on his face and his chest barely rising, the world around me disappeared. The people, the lights, the noise, all I could see was him. I knelt beside him, whispering his name like a prayer, hoping he'd hear me through the pain. There's a sound that comes from a mother's soul in moments like that, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, something in between, something only God understands. My tears fell on his face, mixing with the dirt and the blood, and for a moment I thought I'd lost him. Then, just barely, his eyes fluttered open. I could see the boy he once was, that same look he had when he was 5 years old, running to me after scraping his knee. Only this time, it was worse. Much worse. Much worse. He tried to speak, but his voice was weak, trembling. I leaned close, holding my breath, praying for words of comfort, and then he said it. It was my wife. My heart froze. I wanted to believe I'd misheard him, that maybe the pain made him confused, but something in his eyes told me it was true, and at that moment, my heart didn't just break, it shattered. You see, dear, a mother can forgive the world, but she cannot bear to see her child destroyed by the one he loved most. I had seen that girl before, her sweet smile and polished words. She called me Mama with such ease, but it never felt real. I remember warning him gently that not everyone who smiles at you means you well, but my boy, he was in love. He saw the best in everyone. And I suppose that's what makes tender hearts so vulnerable. They don't see the storm until it's already raining. When I held him in that moment, I wasn't just holding my injured son. I was holding every mistake, every ignored warning, every time I told myself, he's happy, that's all that matters. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from heaven itself, but all I could do was hold his hand and whisper, Mama's here, baby, you're not alone. There's a strange kind of strength that comes to mothers in times like these. It's not loud or fierce. It's quiet, still, a strength that holds you together when every piece of you wants to fall apart. As they lifted him onto that stretcher, I followed beside, my hand never leaving his, and I kept praying, not with fancy words, but with the kind of prayer that comes from a breaking heart, the kind that says, God, please, not my child. At the hospital, time moved slowly. I sat there, clutching his things, his wallet, his phone, his wedding ring that had slipped off his finger. I kept thinking about all the times I'd told him, call your mother when you're on the road, or don't drive when you're upset. Those small, simple things mothers say, they sound nagging at the time, but they come from love. And in that sterile waiting room, I realized something: no matter how grown your child is, they will always need your love. That night, I learned that a mother's pain isn't measured by tears, it's measured by endurance. We keep standing even when our knees tremble. We keep breathing even when our hearts are breaking. Because when your child is fighting for his life, you cannot fall apart. You must become his strength, his hope, his anchor. And when he finally opened his eyes again, when the doctors said he would live, I knew that my love had carried him through, not because I'm powerful, but because love itself is. The kind of love that doesn't fade when life gets cruel, the kind that holds on when the world lets go. So if you ever wonder, my dear, how strong a mother's heart can be, remember this: it can break into 1,000 pieces and still keep beating, still keep loving, still keep praying, because no matter what happens, a mother never stops being a mother. You know, my dear, sometimes the prettiest smiles hide the darkest hearts. I used to believe that goodness could be seen in a person's face, that if someone carried themselves with grace, spoke politely and smiled sweetly, it meant their heart was kind. But life, oh life will teach you different. It will show you that not all sweetness is sugar. Some of it is poison wrapped in charm. When my son first brought that girl home, I remember thinking, she's beautiful. Her hair was perfectly done, her dress simple yet elegant, her manners polished. She called me mama with that practiced warmth that sounds right but feels wrong. You ever meet someone who says all the right things, but still makes the room feel colder? That was her. She smiled with her mouth, but her eyes, they told another story. There was calculation there, a kind of sharpness that didn't belong in love. Still, I stayed quiet, because when your child is happy, you don't want to cast shadows on their sunshine. I told myself, maybe she's just shy, maybe I'm overthinking. So I did what mothers do. I gave her my heart anyway. I cooked for her, bought her gifts on birthdays, called her daughter. I even defended her when others whispered that she was too distant, too proud. That's the thing about love. It blinds you, not only as a partner but as a parent too. You see what you hope to see. But time has a way of peeling back what people try to hide. I began to notice how she treated my son. Small things at first, the way she'd roll her eyes when he spoke, how she'd sigh when he forgot something, how she'd talk to him like he was beneath her. My boy, bless his heart, would always laugh it off. That's just how she is, Mama, he'd say, smiling through the hurt. But I saw it. A mother always sees it. Then came the distance. He stopped visiting as much, stopped calling as often, and when he did, his voice sounded heavy, like he was carrying something he couldn't name. "You okay, baby?" I'd ask. "Just tired, Mama," he'd say. But I could feel it. That kind of tired doesn't come from work, it comes from the soul. One afternoon, I went by their house unannounced. Something told me to. She opened the door, looking surprised and not exactly pleased to see me. The house was quiet, too quiet. My son was in the back room, sitting alone, staring at the wall. I walked in, touched his shoulder, and he looked up at me with eyes I'll never forget, the kind that belonged to a man losing himself piece by piece. I asked him, "Son, is everything all right?" He smiled weakly, that same brave smile children use when they scrape their knees and say, "I'm fine," even though they're bleeding. I looked at her then, standing behind me with folded arms, that polite little smile still on her face. She said, "He's just having a bad week, Mama Mae." Her tone was smooth, but her eyes were cold, and in that moment, something inside me whispered, "This woman doesn't love your son. She loves the idea of being loved." You see, my dear, there are people in this world who feed off affection like it's currency. They don't give it, they trade it, they use kindness when it benefits them, and withdraw it when it doesn't. That girl was one of them. She wore love like perfume, something to make her look good in public, but it faded when the lights were off. When I later found out what she'd done to him, those words, "It was my wife," they made sense, because love like hers was never real. It was a performance, one that ended the moment she didn't get her way. I thought about all the dinners, the laughter, the family photos, how easily a smile can lie, and I realized something: evil doesn't always come wearing anger. Sometimes it comes wearing charm. It hurts to admit, but not everyone who enters your life deserves to stay. Some people are lessons dressed as blessings. My son learned that the hard way, and I learned it beside him. I used to think love could change a person, could soften their heart. But the truth is, love can't grow where it's not planted. You can water a stone for years, but it will never bloom. And yet, I don't hate her. No, hatred is too heavy for an old woman like me. I just pray for her, because a person who can destroy love like that is already lost. They may have beauty, money, and pride, but they will never know peace. And peace, my dear, is what the soul craves the most. So when you meet someone who shines too perfectly, don't be fooled by their light. Look for warmth, not glow, because glow fades when the spotlight moves, but warmth stays steady, quiet, and real. My son learned that love isn't in how someone looks at you when you succeed, it's in how they hold you when you fall. And me, I learned that behind some smiles, there's a story you'd never want to read. You know, my dear, sometimes the heart speaks before the mind can make sense of it. It whispers things, soft little warnings, gentle tugs, and if you're wise, you listen. But most times, we don't. We call it overthinking, We brush it off as worry, and we keep walking straight into the storm that was trying to call our name. I've learned the hard way that the heart, especially a mother's heart, always knows. It doesn't need proof, it just feels. When my son first brought that girl home, something inside me stirred. I couldn't explain it. She was polite enough, smiled just enough, said all the right things, but something about her spirit felt off. You ever meet someone and the air around them just feels colder? Not in temperature, but in energy. It's like a quiet warning, one you can't put into words. That's what I felt that day, but I told myself I was being unfair. I said, "May, she's young, she's nervous. Give her time." So I silenced that little voice inside me, the one that's never wrong. Weeks turned into months, and the feeling didn't go away. I'd visit them sometimes, bring food like any mother does, and every time I'd leave with a heaviness in my chest. I'd see my son trying so hard, laughing too loudly, complimenting her too often, as if he was trying to convince her to love him, and she'd smile. Yes, but her eyes stayed elsewhere. She wasn't with him, not really. Love, my dear, you can't fake it. You can mimic affection, but true love, that's something the soul recognizes immediately. I remember one Sunday afternoon, they came by for lunch. I'd made all his favorites: collard greens, cornbread, roast chicken, because that's what mamas do when their babies come home. I set the table, humming to myself, trying to make the house warm again. But the moment they walked in, that warmth flickered. She didn't look around, didn't smile, didn't even greet me properly, just sat down like she was forced to be there. My son, bless him, tried to lighten the mood. He said, "Mama, she's been tired from work," and gave her that gentle smile of his, the kind that forgives too easily. While we ate, I noticed her pushing food around her plate, barely touching anything. She started criticizing small things, how the chicken was a little too dry, how the house smelled like old books. My boy laughed it off, but I saw his hand tremble when he reached for his glass. And that right there broke something in me, because when love turns into fear, even the quiet kind, that's not love anymore, that's control. After they left, I sat on that porch for a long while, staring at the road, feeling my chest ache. I thought about calling him back, telling him, "Son, you don't look happy," but I didn't, because sometimes, love for our children makes us cowardly. We don't want to lose them to truth, so we let them stay lost in lies. I told myself it wasn't my place, but oh how I wish I had spoken sooner. That uneasy feeling kept growing, stronger each time I saw him. The light in his eyes dimmed little by little, like a candle running out of wax. I'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd say, "Mama, I'm just tired, always distracted, always covering something." The laughter that used to fill his voice when he called me disappeared. It was replaced by a hollow calm, the kind people use when they're pretending to be fine. And yet, I stayed silent, because we mothers sometimes confuse respect with restraint. We don't want to interfere. We say, "He's grown, he'll figure it out." But what if he doesn't? What if the thing our heart is warning us about is the very thing that breaks them? The night I found him in that ditch, those words, "It was my wife," they hit me like thunder, not just because of what they meant, but because deep down I had already known. I had known long before it happened. My heart had told me, but I chose to doubt myself. And that's the cruelest part. Realizing your silence didn't protect your child, it cost him his peace. You see, my dear, intuition is a sacred gift, especially for women, especially for mothers. It's how God whispers to us, not through reason, but through feeling. And when you ignore that voice, life finds a way to remind you why you shouldn't have. I've carried that lesson close ever since. If there's one thing I could tell you, it's this: when something feels wrong, even if it looks right, trust your spirit. Don't wait for proof to believe what your heart already knows. Because love is supposed to feel safe, and the moment it doesn't, that's when you start listening. Not with your ears, but with your soul. You know, my dear, people think that wounds always bleed, that you can see them, touch them, cover them up with a bandage. But the deepest wounds, the ones that hurt the most, don't leave a mark on the skin. They live inside you, buried quiet and deep, where no one can see them. My son, after what happened, carried those kinds of wounds. His body healed. Yes, the doctor said he was lucky to be alive. But his spirit, that took much longer to mend. When I first saw him after the hospital, I hardly recognized the man sitting before me. The boy who once filled every room with laughter now spoke softly, like his words were afraid to leave his mouth. His eyes, once so bright, had a weight in them, not just sadness, but disappointment. It's a heavy thing, realizing that the person you loved most was capable of breaking you. It changes how you see the world. It changes how you see yourself. I'd sit with him sometimes, in silence. We didn't need words. Mothers don't. I'd just hold his hand, stroke his hair, hum a little tune like I used to when he was a child, and every now and then, I'd catch him staring off into nothing. I knew where his mind was going. Back to that night, to those moments before everything fell apart, to the love that turned into pain, to the trust that shattered without warning. You see, betrayal doesn't just hurt because of what someone does, it hurts because of who does it. A stranger can wound you, but someone you love? They pierce straight through the heart. And when that happens, a piece of you goes quiet. My son didn't speak much about her afterward. He didn't need to. I saw it in the way he'd flinch at her name, how his hands would tighten when someone mentioned marriage or love. It's like his heart was still bleeding, silently, even though no one could see it. One evening, we were sitting on the porch. The sky was painted in gold and purple, the kind of sunset that makes you forget your troubles for a moment. He said softly, "Mama, I still don't understand why." I looked at him and said, "Baby, sometimes there isn't a why that makes sense." He nodded, but I could see the ache in him. Betrayal leaves you searching for answers that don't exist. You replay everything, every word, every smile, every moment, wondering which one was real and which one was a lie. He told me once that he kept hearing her voice in his head, the sweet one she used when she wanted something, the cold one she used when she didn't. He said he couldn't trust his own memories anymore because everything felt like a trick. And that's the cruelest part about betrayal. It makes you question your own heart. It takes something pure, like love, and turns it into doubt. For months, he kept to himself, didn't go out much, didn't see his friends. I tried to get him to church, to community dinners, to anything that would remind him life still had warmth. But healing doesn't come on anyone else's schedule. It comes slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. One small step at a time. Then one morning, I found him sitting outside with a notebook. He was writing. I didn't ask what it was. I just smiled and made him some tea. Later he told me it helped. That writing made the pain lighter, like letting some of it out, made room for peace to come in. That's when I knew he was starting to heal, not because he forgot, you never forget, but because he was learning to live with what he couldn't change. You see, my dear, love doesn't always leave happily ever after. Sometimes it leaves lessons written in scars. It teaches you how strong you can be when your heart's been shattered. How to rebuild yourself from pieces you didn't know were still there. My son learned that. He learned that not every wound needs to be avenged. Some just need to be understood. In me, I learned something too. I learned that a mother's love can't erase pain, but it can help carry it. When he cried, I didn't tell him to stop. I let him, because sometimes tears are the soul's way of cleaning out what the heart can't hold anymore. Betrayal doesn't end when the act is over. It lingers, in the quiet, in the memories, in the things unsaid. But time, patience, and love, they don't erase the scar, they just teach you to stop touching it so much. And one day you wake up, look at that scar, and instead of pain, you feel pride, because you survived what was meant to break you. So if you ever find yourself hurt by someone you loved, remember this, my dear, the wound may run deep, but so does your strength, and no betrayal, no heartbreak, can steal the goodness out of a heart that still chooses to love again. You know, my dear, forgiveness is one of those words that sounds so gentle yet it feels so hard when it's your turn to live it. People think forgiving means forgetting, or that it means saying what happened was all right. But no, that's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is strength. It's quiet courage. It's choosing to let go, not for them but for yourself, because carrying pain in your heart too long only poisons your spirit. I had to learn that, watching my boy try to put himself back together after what she did. After he came home from the hospital, our days were long and quiet. He'd sit by the window for hours, just watching the world move without him. Sometimes he'd ask questions that had no answers, like, why do people hurt the ones who love them most? Or how do you forgive someone who never says sorry? And all I could do was hold his hand, because no amount of talking can rush healing. Pain has its own rhythm, and you have to let it move through you before you can release it. There were nights I'd hear him crying softly in his room. I'd stand by the door, my heart breaking, wanting to go in, but I didn't, because sometimes a person needs to sit with their pain before they can rise from it. When morning came, I'd make breakfast like always, and he'd sit across from me, quiet but calmer. You could tell he was trying to make peace with something he'd never fully understand. One day he surprised me. He said, "Mama, I want to forgive her." I looked at him, not sure I'd heard right. I thought he was still too raw, too angry. But he said, "I don't want her to own my heart anymore." And right then, I knew my son had found the first step toward healing. Because forgiveness isn't about giving someone permission to hurt you again. It's about freeing yourself from being chained to the moment they did. It wasn't easy for him. Some days he'd say he forgave her, and the next he'd wake up angry all over again. That's how forgiveness works. It's not one moment, it's 1,000 little choices. Every time the memory comes back, every time the pain resurfaces, you have to choose peace over bitterness. I told him, "Baby, forgiveness doesn't mean you welcome her back into your life. It means you stop letting her live rent-free in your mind." We prayed a lot together during those months. Not the kind of prayers filled with fancy words, but the kind that come from the gut, shaky, tearful, real. He'd ask God to take away his hatred, to give him peace, to teach him to love himself again. And little by little I saw it happen. His shoulders weren't as heavy, his voice not as broken. He started going out again, spending time with friends, finding joy in small things. Forgiveness brought color back into his life. It didn't erase what happened. The memories still came, but they no longer ruled him. I remember one evening, we were sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies come out, and he said, "Mama, I don't hate her anymore." I looked at him and smiled. "That's good," I said, "because hate is just love that's been burned and left too long in the ashes. Letting it go means your heart is still good." He nodded and said, "I don't think I'll ever understand why she did what she did, but I don't need to anymore." And that, my dear, is when I knew forgiveness had done its work. Because true forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about reclaiming your peace from it. As for me, I had to forgive her too. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were nights I'd look up at the sky and ask God, why her? Why my son? I wanted to hate her. I truly did. But every time I prayed, I felt that gentle nudge in my spirit saying, "Let it go, May. Let me handle it." And I did. Because I knew that carrying that bitterness would only keep my boy's wound open, and maybe even mine too. In time, my son found his footing again. He learned to smile, to laugh, to trust life slowly. And though he never went back to her, he wished her peace. That was his way of closing the door without slamming it. You see, my dear, forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. It means you've decided that what someone did to you will not decide who you become. It's choosing to rise, not with vengeance, but with grace. Because when you forgive, you take your power back. And there's nothing stronger, nothing braver, than a heart that chooses peace after being broken. So when life wounds you, and it will, remember this: forgiveness is not about them. It's about you. It's about saying, "You hurt me, but you will not define me." And when you can say that with a steady heart, that's when you know you've truly healed.